Hello, Family Recovery Collective, and welcome to the next interview in our series. We're very excited for this presenter and to introduce him to you so that he can share a lot about the work that he does with clients, with families all across the board. So without further ado, Jac Charlier is the executive director of TASC's Center for Health and Justice, which specializes in solutions to reduce drug use and drug-related crime. A former deputy chief with Illinois State Patrol, Jac is the founder and CEO of the Police Treatment and Community Collaborative, known as PTACC, the national and global voice of the deflection field. He is a founder of the International Deflection Field, creating strategies that bridge law enforcement, treatment, and community to improve public safety and health. Jac is a military veteran and an Eagle Scout. He holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the University of Illinois and a master's degree in public policy from The Ohio State University, go Bucks, where his thesis focused on the experiences of crime survivors. He is a board member of the Illinois Academy of Criminology. He and his wife have 5 children, and when possible, he is glad to pick up a rugby match whenever in whatever country he is working. Welcome, Jac.
Thank you, Erin. I appreciate it, and especially going through a little bit longer introduction. I appreciate that. It's fun to hear about myself. I don't think about that all the time.
Of course. I'm going to throw it to Neely. She's going to start us off with some questions for this first part of our interview, but we're so excited to have you.
That's right. Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Jac. We're so glad you're here, as Erin was saying, and you have such an interesting background. So I want to start off by asking you, how does your background lead you to a place where you become the founder of deflection programs? How did that happen?
Yeah, that sounds good, Neely. Thank you for that as an opening question, and thank you for allowing me to be here with you. So there's 3 major strands, and I'll do them quickly, that kind of bring us to this field and this word and this movement called deflection. One is I'm very active and have been active in my hometown in community activity. And when you do community work, you begin to see the power of what it means when we gather together around the changes we can do as citizens in our community and in our neighborhood. So that's one strand of it. The second strand is my background in law enforcement and seeing how drug use, misuse, and addiction, when not treated, can lead to damage to the individual, certainly, but also to the family and the community. And then the third strand is related to the first 2, in that when you put folks who need help but aren't getting it, folks who are waiting too long before they get the help they need in community settings, what you see then is the intergenerational nature of addiction and how it passes from, say, one generation, grandparents, to then their kids, the parents who then have kids, and seeing that both in my law enforcement and in my community career, and thinking there must be a different way by which we can get at issues of drug misuse and addiction when left untreated and not caught early, so to speak. So those are the 3 strands that come together that eventually not only myself, but myself and others would come to found this new field of deflection.
I'm thinking, as you're talking, about some of my prior career experience when I was adjacent to law enforcement, and it felt like it was an acute process. In other words, we were attacking one problem at a time, but not looking systemically at how we could avoid the problem altogether. And it sounds like you were a part of a group of people many years ago who were having some of those same epiphanies and really took action to create new programs, new ways of thinking, new ways for community solutions to come forward. And you've been using this term called deflection. So I wondered if you would maybe take a minute to tell us, what is a deflection program and how does that show up in communities?
And Neely, I'm going to come right off the points that you used of the experiences of myself and others in the community setting. So there's kind of 6 words we use to describe deflection, but I'm going to start with 2 of them that are most relevant to your question. The first one is, of course, community, and the second one is early. Now, for the folks who'll be viewing this, we might think generally of people whose drug misuse and addiction. I'm going to stay focused just on addiction. there's other things going on too. I want to be clear on that. We recognize it, we understand it. But how folks, drugs misuse and addiction, we might think of that as let's solve that through arresting people, putting them in jails and courts and prisons because they'll come out better. The truth is, in the United States, there is effectively no treatment in jails whatsoever. It exists here and there, and prison treatment does exist, but at a capacity of about 1 out of 10 people get it. But the general public thinks of let's do something along that approach as the way to get at it. But it does actually almost nothing. And we know that it yields almost nothing. So those 2 words, early and community, really are 2 of the 6 words that define deflection in the following way. What if we could get to people earlier rather than later being emergency rooms, later being standing in front of a judge in court, later being you've been arrested 13 times. We know that there's a drug misuse and addiction, but we've done nothing about it. Let's just keep waiting. That's later. Early is deflection. And where does that occur? That occurs in the community versus later, which occurs in the justice system, in emergency rooms, sadly at times in morgues. That's what we have been doing in the United States. And there's reason why that's been that way. That's called later. Deflection is called earlier, and that occurs in community. And the cool thing about it is when we get to people earlier in all sorts of areas, not limited to the chronic relapsing disease, brain disease known as addiction, is we get better outcomes. It costs less. The person can heal faster. Recovery is more likely. And the family and the kids in the home do not then have to go through the full cascade of things that go along with folks who unfortunately get into drug misuse and certainly into drug addiction. Early and community are the 2 ways I describe it when I'm talking to a lot of folks, just as an introductory way to understand this word, field, and movement of deflection.
At one point in my career, I was working with the Department of Public Safety in my state. And in that capacity, I had the opportunity to go out on some operations with some units that were doing drug enforcement. And unfortunately, those particular activities involved homes where children were located. So I know in those situations, there was an interdisciplinary team that came forward to not only be protective of the officers and the people inside the home, but specifically to address the children that were in the home that had been exposed to those very negative environments. So what I'm thinking about is, gosh, wouldn't it have been nice if someone would have been able to get to those families and offer them assistance prior to it being in that critical situation? And maybe it won't solve all problems, but that effort to identify who in our community needs help and marshal the resources to provide help is such a worthy cause, and really not only changes that family system, but changes that community. So I'm so honored that you're here telling us about this work that you're doing. If we take it from that global perspective and we break it down into a family that's trying to figure out what the next thing to do is, could you create for us some opportunities through real world stories that maybe draw from your law enforcement career of times when a family might be in a position or an individual might be in a position to be offered a deflection program? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. And I'll give you just a couple examples from the field. First thing is deflection is about 10 years old in the United States, approximately. So it's relatively young in the range of responses we have to folks who have drug misuse and addiction, family, individual. So I say that because I don't want anybody to view this and think that this is the only approach. I'm sure most people don't think that, but just to be clear, the idea of drug prevention is always, I call that God's work. We should always be focused on prevention. And we certainly, because I'm going to describe deflection from a law enforcement perspective, we also don't want people waiting until the point that you've had contact with law enforcement, nor do we want law enforcement to be in the business of treating people with drug misuse and addiction. Neither of those are deflection. So I want to just say that up front to make sure this is set correctly. So there's 2 ways, 2 examples I'll give to folks. One is the pathway. We call them the 6 ways of doing deflection, are called the 6 pathways of deflection. And one is called the self-referral pathway, which is counterintuitive, which says that for communities that have deflection initiatives, you can, as an individual who needs help and does not know how to get it, does not know how to navigate the waters, you can go into the police station and without any fear of arrest or anything happening, go in and say, I need help. I am using drugs. Can you help me? And in communities where deflection exists, the deflection initiative will take over. It will involve some contact with police, obviously, because you walked into a police station, as well as then a deflection. I don't want to call it team as give the image that people are in cars riding around. Some folks who might be have lived expertise, some folks who might be treatment counselors, whatever it might be, will be readily available to either be at the police station, at the district, or follow up with you soon thereafter. Again, key point, without fear of arrest, you're there because your personal drug use and the behaviors associated with it are really creating a problem. You don't know where else to go. That's what we're trying to set up as one pathway of deflection called self-referral. You would walk into the station and you would begin then to get connected both to engagement, to someone who would begin to walk alongside you. That's critically important, but is not just get into treatment. It is to have someone there who can make that journey with you. And those are often volunteers. They're often peers, people themselves, obviously, in recovery. And so they have that lived expertise to help navigate you through it. And eventually that might be treatment, but certainly is going to be promotion or recovery. So that's called self-referral. And again, that's counterintuitive to why you would walk into a police station normally and say, I'd like help. I'm using drugs. Can you help me? For deflection, you would definitely not do that. Now in communities, as I said, where that exists, you can do it. The other version of it, which is possibly a more likely scenario that many people will know if they have family members who face this challenge, is they'll have a counter on the street with law enforcement. That might be a sheriff's deputy, might be a trooper, might be a local police officer, some other kind of agent. And as a result of that encounter, the officer, she's making a decision. Am I going to arrest here? What's going on? And so what we want people to know is where there's deflection initiatives to raise up to the officer and let her know, officer, this is what I've got going on in my life. I'd like help with this, please. Can you get me connected into treatment? And I'm saying that generally, right? I'm just using that for a simple example. Can you help me get into treatment? And in communities where deflection exists, officers, in fact, can, where there aren't really other things going on in a situation. I want to be clear. That's absolutely part of my job is to help you get connected into those situations with treatment, housing services, and recovery are important. We can help you get connected to them. That allows the person to get to be where they need to be. It allows the officer, allows her to get back to her job and her duties that she needs to perform. And the deflection team, if you will, the deflection initiative takes over from there. These are situations that are very common. They're common to lots of people where you have an encounter with law enforcement. And what you really want to do is lift up why this is happening. Issues around public safety, issues around if there's active warrants, issues around the type of thing that caused the encounter. Those aside, we don't dismiss those, but where the officer and she can make that kind of decision and deflection exists, you'll get deflected and you'll be then following up with things that are there to help you and people who are there to support you.
So you're describing some discretion that happens at the initial encounter with a law enforcement
Correct.
officer. And
Correct.
I would suggest that there's probably some training. It sounds like that person would have benefited from some training, not just about the resources that are available, but also the type of person that would be a good fit for that opportunity. What does that training look like? And how does the officer know if this person might be able to benefit from those services?
And so, it's a great question. Thank you for that. The training is not limited to the officers. I want to be clear. What we're doing in deflection is giving the officers a third option when they encounter people or are encountered by people either way, a third option by which they can act when they see, and this is answering your question of what do they get, when they see situations where drug misuse and addiction are the drivers of why that contact occurs and keeps occurring, right? Officers are smart. They're working the streets. They know their neighborhoods. They know their communities. They know who's around. And they know, boy, I've seen Jack 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. They have a good heart as everybody. And they don't really want to be in this business of, look, just arrest you and take you on. So the kind of training that the officers receive is on awareness around why someone might be contacting you and why, as a result of drug misuse and addiction, that could be driving it, right? Versus just stop. Why don't they just stop? Why don't they get help? So you have to understand enough, just enough around addiction as a chronic relapsing disease of the brain. What does recovery look like? Most people get into recovery, right? 75% of people get into recovery. And important for officers in the training, they have to know that there's success on the other side of this, and they play a critical role in that, because generally what officers see is failure all day long, harm and disaster and darkness all day long. And so deflection allows them to see hope and to see light, that their actions of deflecting someone can get that person into a right place. Now, for the officers and law enforcement folk who are on here listening, I want them to hear this is not put entirely on your shoulders. We ask you through your training, as a result of training, to identify those people for whom deflection makes sense as a result of why they're having contact with you. We don't ask you to make a clinical assessment. We don't ask you to begin treatment or case management. Just understand why did they encounter you? Is this being driven by drug misuse and addiction and the behaviors associated with it? Treatment and people in recovery who are working part of deflection, volunteer others, they also are trained on why does law enforcement do what it does? How do you best engage people who are right at that point of contact? And how do you stay with them for the duration so they can get to be where they need to be? And then how do you engage their families? Because the families and the children are critically important, or critical elements of deflection. So the training on both sides, if you will, to use that word sides, that's not fair because they work together, but both sides is helping them understand the role of the other. And then again, the interplay of drug misuse and addiction and what they need to each know about it and how they can work collaboratively together through a process that allows the deflection to occur fairly quickly in real time on the street at a station. So within a couple hours or so, we're already beginning the process of engagement and deflection.
I'm sitting here listening to you. The audience can't see that I'm smiling and nodding throughout all of your comments, because I've spoken many times to the law enforcement community around self-care and burnout. And as you're describing all of these options, the three options, and that aspect of hope that comes with deflection, it occurs to me that if I were a law enforcement officer, I would find it helpful in being able to use this option, and it might even improve my level of burnout in a system that seems to be repetitive and not really resolving issues. I'm glad you brought that up. But so if I'm a family and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, man, I wonder if there's a deflection program near me, is there a way for people to go online or reach out to a certain entity in order for them to identify a local program?
So there's two ways to do it right now. And I want to say this, the second way when I get to it is not the way to start. So I'm going to start with number one. Number one, do what we all do, which is go to Google, get on your phone, ask AI, whatever it is, and say, do I have a deflection program in my community? So for example, if you lived in Quincy, Illinois, which is a smaller, medium-sized city in rural Illinois, and you were to type in Quincy and deflection, you would come up with the initiative that the Quincy Police Department and the community of Quincy and the county participate in, and deflectionists. You would find it and you'd get the email and the web page and all that good stuff, Facebook page, I should say. So just Google the word deflection along with your city, your county, your town, and see what you get. The second option, of course, is to contact PTACC right here, the Police Treatment and Community Collaborative. We're familiar with many, but not all of the initiatives. Why not all, Jack? Because that'd be great. Because deflection exists at a local level. It occurs in the community, and those can happen just on their own very organically, and they may really just market to their own community, which is fine. So they're not as if they're going out and listing themselves somewhere. And those are the ones that we generally will not know about. But start just by Googling it, which is what we do anyway, and see what you find there. And I do want to say this too, Neely. If you find that you do not have a deflection initiative in your community, I'm going to ask you, go start one on behalf of the folks who need help and don't know how to get it and are beginning to have possibly law enforcement encounters, although you do need to wait for that, start one. If you're an officer listening to this and you say, boy, I'd love this for my well-being, Neely, absolutely. The well-being of my officers and my community and the people I serve, whatever your reason, go start a deflection initiative, reach out to PTACC, and we can help you get that underway.
That's awesome. And I have been on your website. It's a great website. And one of the things that I noticed on your website is that you are available in all types of communities. So this is not an urban program. This is not a rural program. This is both. And you're involved with our Native American communities as well as internationally. So the idea that any community can have a deflection program is true. Any community that needed to or wanted to start a program could learn what the best practices are from your organization. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I do want to speak especially to our rural neighbors across our great nation. Much of deflection actually exists in rural communities, and much of its early founding was in rural communities, smaller cities, medium-sized cities, and we always honor and lift that up. You mentioned tribal nations. Tribal nations also practice deflection. It's really well suited where a community wants to change the script on how they're responding to drug misuse and addiction compared to how they did in the past, in a community setting, in a collaborative way, bringing together all kind of the different entities, including people who are in recovery, including the people who are encountering those like law enforcement, fire, EMS, who are using drugs and want to do something different. But rural and tribal and frontier, small towns, medium towns, they are really in many ways the heart and lifeblood of deflection. And I always lift that up and lift them up.
Thank you for sharing that. And that brings me to the next question, which is, let's say a family has identified that there is a deflection program in their community and they want to know more or they want to see how to get involved. Can a family reach out to a deflection program, or does it have to be the individual that has the identified concern, whether it be drugs and alcohol use, misuse, or abuse, or mental health issues?
So family absolutely can reach out. In fact, what we say in deflection, and as I said, I'm really seeding my answers within the world of law enforcement, but we are not looking to put this on law enforcement, right? So families can absolutely reach out. They can reach out on behalf of the person, their loved one, their neighbor, whatever it might be that they care about. And in doing that outreach, again, without fear of anything happening on an enforcement side, the deflection initiative can take over. And I do want to also offer that the response, if you will, and again, I don't want to think of people getting into cars or lights and sirens. It's not that. The response or the engagement, what we call the relentless engagement that would begin from deflection, might involve no officers and no first responders at all. And that's very important to understand also. So we lift up very much the role they play, but they've got other things to do. If someone comes to the attention of a deflection initiative in your community who is in need of connection, engagement, and a warm handoff to treatment, housing services, and recovery, it might be the deflection initiative minus the first responders that are there, that come, knock on the door, say, we are here. Thank you for contacting us. What can we do to help you? And then they'll be there and they'll stay there. It's not a one and done. It's not a paper referral, but absolutely families can initiate it. And again, it does not need to be the person, and it does not necessarily mean that a law enforcement officer or any first responder will be part of it. Once a person's identified, Neely, that's the important part. Then deflection can begin from there. You don't need to bring in, again, the first responder just to bring them back into it.
Because I could easily see that a family might be concerned that if they do make that contact, that it might set off a series of unintended consequences, including potentially an arrest. And so they would be reluctant to reach out if that was something that they were trying to avoid.
Correct. Yep. No, totally correct. We understand that. We're aware of it. I mean, let's just be honest. Like, this is drug use. We're aware of that. And so deflection was built around the idea. And I give credit to law enforcement. Much of deflection actually emerged out of law enforcement because of their exhaustion of trying to deal with something known as addiction that they are well aware they cannot solve through policing and law enforcement procedures. So their interest is not actually in arresting or using this as a mechanism to bait people. It's the exact opposite. It's saying, we know we can't deal with this. We need help That help is called deflection. If the call comes in or the information comes in from wherever, rock and roll. Let's get the folks out there who can do that connection. We've got other stuff to do that we need to pay attention to. Let the professionals and volunteers and those who are in recovery help, who are better positioned to help those who are contacting us in the first place. They're very good with that. There's no challenge or issue on their end.
You and I have talked about this, and so the viewers may not know that in addition to being a lawyer, I also work with families facing addiction and mental health issues and facilitate interventions for families. And it's interesting to me how many times I will walk in to work with a family, and two parts. The first part is how long it's been going on. The concerns that everyone's had typically are many years in the build-up process to asking for help. And I always think, gosh, would it be like if this process, this disease that is progressive, what if it had been interrupted earlier? So I want to make that point that there's no reason to wait till it gets to the really dire consequences. But the second thing that I observe in that intervention process is how often the person that is offered the opportunity for help, how often they are ready for it. They will say, gosh, I knew I had a problem and I've been trying to figure out what to do for a very long time. So when I think about the deflection programs that you're describing and families reaching out to deflection programs to seek that help, I'm really hopeful that families will consider it, because there's no reason to let people hit something called a rock bottom. Maybe we need to elevate the bottom through deflection programs and offer services sooner. And we might be surprised how many times people take the invitation. With that in mind, though, it is a voluntary program. Is that correct?
Deflection is voluntary, even at the point where an officer considers the possibility. Again, let's go to that end of it, where an officer considers the possibility that there's something here, let's do a deflection, but if it doesn't go well, we might come back and have to try something else. Even in that point, yes, it's voluntary, absolutely. And I wanted to say something on very quickly, Neely, on another great point. You made lots of great points during our conversation. I thank you for that. Deflection is what's called a low threshold access. So when you hear this, I use two words right up front. I said it's early and it's in community. One of the other words of the 6 words that defines deflection is it's low threshold. And of the very few things that we know absolutely for sure from 5 decades of research about how do we engage people into treatment and to get them into recovery, which is the most likely option for all people, is into recovery. That's where most people end up. And that's great news, obviously. But we know that we need to offer people a low threshold process. That's really what deflection's doing. So don't think of it as it's a law enforcement intervention, it's a treatment intervention. It's an early community-based low threshold option. And Neely, that speaks exactly to what you were talking about. How low can we set that bar by which we allow the person who's struggling and looking for light to be able to step over? And there's nothing wrong with setting that bar as low as possible. That's what we're trying to do. We'll do it in community. We'll come to you. We'll make it easy through an officer, through your family, through a fire station, at the library, wherever we need to be, we're going to be, so that you can get the help you need. And that's really the way to think about what deflection has really done, is operationalize this low threshold approach. Because otherwise, if you don't have a low threshold, you're standing before a judge, you're in an emergency room, you are 7 years down the road, your family's exhausted because they don't know what to do. That's high threshold. Deflection is low threshold.
Wonderful. I'm so glad you brought that up. And I know that there are many families watching this that are at that high threshold level. And so we want to encourage them too, that now's the time to see what resources are in your community. And if a deflection program is available, reach out and find out if that can be helpful to you and your loved one. Hey, thank you, Jack. This has been a great first part of our interview. And if you guys are interested in hearing more about deflection programs, please come back and watch part 2 when Aaron will interview Jack and ask more questions.